Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Hearn, and I'm the pastor of the First Baptist Church in Duluth, Georgia, and the author of Technicolor, Learning How to Embrace Multicultural Ministry. It's my joy to be with you today and tell you a little bit about the Technicolor story and how that God has worked in our midst to bring a monocultural suburban church in Atlanta, Georgia, to become a multicultural community filled with all the wonderful hues and all the wonderful races, all the wonderful diversity and nationalities that make up our community. I share with people very honestly, I'm not educationally nor experientially qualified to be someone declared an expert on multicultural worship or multicultural ministry. I grew up in the mountains of Virginia, not exactly the diversity capital of the world. I was educated. I received my bachelor's of ministry degree from Carson Newman College in Tennessee, and then a master's of evangelism from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, and a doctorate of church growth. And so my entire ministry has been spent how to expand and how to build the local New Testament church. But yet, I have found that many educational institutions and denominations have forsaken and forgot the idea of how to cross cultural barriers in order to become truly a church for all people. It has indeed changed the way in which I view ministry. Having a master's degree in evangelism and a doctorate degree in church growth, I became a student of the Church Growth Institutes and C. Peter Wagner's work, and before him, Donald Mcgavrin. Donald Mcgavrin is noted for being the person whom came up with the concept of the homogeneous unit principle. Mcgavrin, a missionary to India, found that when we cross the least number of cultural barriers, there's the greatest opportunity for us to reach people. And unfortunately, that missional principle became used as an excuse for segregated worship throughout America. And although I taught that principle and practiced that principle and endorsed that principle, I have found that it has been misused. Indeed, the homogeneous unit principle should be used for evangelism and missions purposes, not to be an excuse for trying to segregate people of color and people of different nationalities from worshiping together. Now, when I came to Duluth, Georgia, I came to one of the most diverse areas in all of the United States. I moved here from Indianapolis, Indiana. I had completed an 8-year pastorate there in Indianapolis. Indianapolis is considered the crossroads of America. More interstates crisscross in Indianapolis than any other place in America. And so Indianapolis is oftentimes considered to be a place of diversity. But it's pretty monocultural diversity. The county in which I lived in was 92% Anglo. But when I came here to Duluth and we purchased our home here, I moved into our house, and our neighbors to the left of me are a cross-cultural couple from Malaysia and Vietnam. My neighbors to the right of me are a couple from Korea. My neighbors behind me are a couple from South Asia, India. Across the street from me is a family from Zimbabwe. At the end of our cul-de-sac is a doctor from Puerto Rico. And across the street from them, a multi-generational family from Nigeria. And I realized that I was in one of the most diverse places in all of the United States. Unfortunately, none of those people groups were represented in my new congregation. First Baptist Church of Duluth is a church over 125 years old. It is a strong mission-giving church and a strong suburban church just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. But yet, as the community became increasingly diverse, The church did not. And so I set out to try to educate myself as to how that we could begin to endear ourselves to be able to find out how we could reach cross-cultural barriers and bring people of different nationalities and of different cultural mixes into our fellowship. And that story is actually what is comprised in my book, Technicolor. It was lessons of trial and error, trying to find people whom had pioneered this path ahead of me. But one of the things that I found is that very few churches had transitioned from a monocultural model to a multicultural model. One of the first things that we needed to do was to be able to educate ourselves concerning our community. Duluth is a city that was rapidly becoming diversified. In 1990, Duluth was 92% Anglo. In 2000, Duluth was 68% Anglo. But by the year 2010, it was 41% Anglo. And therefore 59% non-Anglo and 28% were born outside the United States. That meant that Duluth is what demographers now call a majority-minority city. I have now found that in 25 years, it is believed that every major city in America will be 60% non-Anglo. And so this is something that not only was affecting our community and our church, but we were just 25 years ahead of the curve of what is going to be being dealt with in every community and in every church across our land. At that time, our church, being an all-Anglo church, had all-Anglo leadership. And it was important for us to try to find how can we cross these cultural barriers. One of the first things that I did was that I sought persons of peace. I learned from missionaries that when they go into a new culture, one of the first things they do is try to find someone who is open enough to share with them about the culture. That person may not even be a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ, but are willing to share about their culture. And so I tried to seek out people from different culture groups, especially the largest populated culture groups in our area, to begin to coach me and share with me how that we could effectively reach their people. One such person was Kadmil Kumar. To tell you the story, Kadmil is from India. Our chairman of the deacons at the time in which I became pastor was a retired missionary by the name of Tom Jones. Tom, retired missionary from Kenya, had a missionary daughter and son-in-law who were based in Delhi, India. He said, "My daughter and son-in-law are furloughing and coming home at Christmas time. I'd love for you to meet them." And I said, "I look forward to meeting them." And they brought with them a national pastor, a pastor from Delhi, India, by the name of Daniel Kumar. He operates a mission organization called the Good News Center. So there in my office, I met missionaries John and Sarah Davenport and their national pastor friend, Daniel Kumar. Daniel shared with me his vision of putting a church planting catalyst in all of the 26 what he calls gateway cities, cities of over 1 million people throughout the entire northern crest of India. And so I listened to his missionary calling and was so amazed and wanted to partner with him. When he learned of my heart for the nations, he said, "I have a brother who lives here." And I said, "Here in the United States?" And he said, "No, here in Duluth, Georgia." I said, "You're kidding me." And I said, "Is there any way that I can meet him and get to know him?" He said, "He's looking for an evangelical church in the area." And I said, "I sure think that we could accommodate him on that." I found that he and his wife, who is, by the way, from El Salvador, a cross-cultural couple, were attending another local church in the area. And I didn't want to try to lure them away, But I wanted to meet with him and to just learn from him. For the next year, I met with him for breakfast about once every 6 weeks to just talk about how that we could do outreach efforts in the South Asian community within our reach. At the end of that year, Cadmiel came to me and said, "Pastor, you've never asked me to become a member of your church." I said, "Cadmiel, I wouldn't ask you to leave your church unless God were telling you to." He says, "I believe with all my heart that God wants me to be a part of what you're doing." And God led Cadmiel to become a part of our church. He later became the chairman of our missions committee, and now has been ordained and served 2 terms as a deacon in the life of our church. I'm telling you, God is in the process of bringing leaders from different countries because we prayed for leaders from different countries. The same has been true of other nationalities as we've sought to reach out and cross those cultural barriers. In 2010, when I became pastor here, our church had all white, all Anglo deacons. In 2013, we ordained the first non-white, born outside the United States, deacons in the 125-year history of our church. Since that time, we have ordained deacons from India, from Korea, from Ecuador, from Nigeria. And God is in the process of continuing to bring people of leadership of different nationalities to come be a part of our fellowship. You may ask, how do you start such a ministry like this? Where do you even begin? And I'll be honest with you, that was one of the most difficult things for me to try to figure out. Not having a roadmap or really even a model to try to seek after, my first thing was to study the community and study how that it had changed over the period of time. Duluth began as a sleepy railroad community in the outskirts of Atlanta. There are people that still remember when Duluth was a 1 stoplight community on your way to absolutely nowhere. A little drugstore downtown is still the gathering spot for many old school Duluthians who gather there every morning to eat breakfast, tell stories, and spend time with one another. Local politicians make that a gathering spot that they oftentimes go and politically stump and try to gather support. There's old school Duluth. Then in the 1980s and 90s, Duluth became a rapidly growing suburban community and became noted for its palatial homes and for its upscale lifestyle. Many of the residents of Duluth were CEOs and people of enterprise, professional football players, baseball players, and athletes of all kinds began to come to Duluth. And Duluth became known as a place of tremendous prosperity. Then in 1996, Atlanta hosted the Summer Olympics. The world came to our city. And so when the world came to our city, world leaders began to see Duluth as a very inviting place. After that time, Duluth became known as a place of rapidly growing business from outside the United States. Koreans populated our community in mass numbers. We have the largest Korean population east of the Mississippi. South Asian Indian people began to come in rapid numbers. There is a Hindu temple 100 yards from our church building. And I've been told that anything within a 5-mile radius of a Hindu temple is considered to be holy ground. Therefore, homes within a 5-mile radius of that Hindu temple are oftentimes sought after with tremendous all kinds of energy to try to be able to to be near that Hindu temple. Matter of fact, our Christian preschool, the second largest people group populating our preschool, are people of South Asian descent and of Hindu religion, sending their children to a Christian-oriented preschool, learning daily songs, Bible stories, and the story of Jesus Christ. And so as we saw this rapidly growing population moving to our city, we needed to find ways that we could begin to do ministry with and not ministry to. I think there's a big difference. See, I find a lot of churches who find a pocket or a population group and they begin to do ministry to. They find out how that they can support them, how that they can minister to them, but there's never any intent of bringing them in or coming alongside of them to do ministry with. So we began to seek ways, what is it in those communities that they celebrate, and what could we do to celebrate alongside of them? We began to do cultural celebrations within our church. One of the very first one of those was on the Sunday closest to August the 15th, we celebrate Indian New Year. We want to be able to tell all of our South Asian friends, we're glad to have the opportunity to share in this community celebration, and we want you to know that there's a church in this community that celebrates I said New Year, it's Independence Day, Indian Independence Day. I was in a Indian restaurant in our community, sharing with them that we were about ready to celebrate Indian Independence Day. The owner, who is a Muslim gentleman, a gentleman by the name of Nadeeb, said, "Who will be singing the national anthem at your Indian Independence Day celebration?" I said, "Well, I guess you will." And he said, "You would allow me to come and sing the national anthem at your Indian Independence Day?" I said, "Yes, Nadeeb, if you would come, we would love to have you come sing the national anthem." There's nothing wrong with having someone sing their national anthem in our church. And so Nadeeb said that he would be there. On that Sunday morning, Nadeeb came. Not only did Nadeeb come, but he brought an Asian television cast along with him who filmed the entire service and also broadcasted across cable access channels across the world to be able to share with Indian people about an Indian celebration taking place in an American church. The gospel of Jesus Christ went out to all the nations and to all the people of the world that have Indian descent. That's the kind of thing that God is doing through these celebrations. Several years later, we were able to take upon a new celebration. We celebrate East Asian New Year. Over half the world celebrate New Year on a different calendar than we do. We celebrate New Year on January the 1st, but the East Asian people celebrate New Year on the lunar calendar, oftentimes coming in February. And so we decided that with a large Korean population as well as a large Chinese population and Vietnamese population, that we would have an East Asian New Year celebration. We put together a Korean fan dance team that was headed up by one of our new Korean members, but the entire fan dance team was comprised of Anglos and people from other nationalities. The Korean newspaper came and covered the event and put it on the front page that people of different nationalities had embraced the Korean fan dance. But even more wonderful than that was that the Korean consulate picked up news of this and said that we have an award that we give to all veterans of the Korean War. We found 9 Korean War veterans within our congregation, and we found that the Korean consulate would give them a medal of peace, thanking them for what had taken place during the Korean conflict. The Korean consulate said that we will send a representative to be able to award this Medal of Peace. But in one of our staff meetings, one of our Korean interns said, "No, Pastor, I think that it would be more meaningful if the children of Korean people in our community were to drape these war veterans with that Korean medal." And so we had those 9 men honored. And as they came forward, a child from one of the Korean families of our congregation draped their neck with the Medal of Peace, thanking them that because of their efforts, they were able to live in a land where that they were capable of hearing the gospel and being able to share their faith. Those are the kind of things that have crossed those cultural barriers. They're the kind of things that have allowed us to be able to bring together multiple cultures into one setting. Now, being a pastor of a multicultural church is not all roses. There are all kinds of struggles. For instance, there are some people who just simply don't want to be a part of a multicultural community. Many of them are moving away from the community because they don't want to be a part of it physically. And they certainly don't want to be a part of it in their spiritual community. Many are not willing to admit that the basis of that could very well be racism or tremendous prejudice. But yet, as that has taken place, leadership has risen to the occasion and continued to keep our path straight and continue to support and encourage where we've been headed. One of the also struggles of being a part of a multicultural church is that it has been said that when you get a group multiculturally together, it's by all probability that you're going to offend someone. You're going to say something that you don't know is culturally insensitive in their setting, or you don't realize that causes disdain or consternation. We try to tell people right up front that we want this to be a safe place, that if they feel offense, that they can share it, and if we can help to be able to alleviate it, we'll do everything we can. Another thing that's been difficult across these years is that although we have begun to become attractional to bring people from different nationalities to our church, is that they still see our church as predominantly Anglo, and oftentimes refer to our church as an American church. And therefore, they don't volunteer for participation. They will allow themselves to be recruited. And so it just changed the way in which we recruit leaders. It's changed the way in which we've sought participation. If you just give an announcement from the pulpit saying all those who will participate, almost none of our international attenders will participate. They think that that's something of which is for the rest of the church. But if you personally invite someone of international descent, then they feel wanted, desired, and feel like that their part is important. So it's changed the way in which we've sought to get volunteers to get more actively involved within our church. One of the things that we've done to increase cross-cultural sensitivity within our fellowship is we've begun what we call cross-class. Cross-class is a cross-cultural, cross-generational group of people meeting at the foot of the cross. We teach this class twice a year. It's 6 weeks in length, and most of the time taught in my home. Most of the time we have between 8 and 10 different nationalities who are involved within the class. And The oldest will be someone possibly in their 70s, and the youngest someone in their 20s. And so genuinely we have a cross-generational, cross-cultural gathering. It's more than just a Bible study. Although the Bible is used, it is a cross-cultural experience. It's an opportunity for us to share very openly and very honestly in a setting that allows them to share what they desire to have in their church, what encourages them and blesses them, and what oftentimes hurts them or causes them pain. On one such occasion, one senior adult saintly lady in our congregation said that she had never sat in the living room of someone across from a black person. There were two families of Nigerian descent within our group. They both rose and went and hugged her when she said that. To this day, they have become best of friends. And I think that have formed a bond that will remain for many, many years to come. These groups oftentimes form friendships that become lasting partnerships in life and in ministry. A lady from Haiti became best friends with another lady from Moldova in a cross class. They sit next to each other in the choir now. A doctor from Korea becomes best friends with a construction worker from Afghanistan and become best friends and sit together oftentimes in worship service. God is in the process of bringing people together across those cross-cultural barriers. And cross-class has been a wonderful way of doing it. We began that class using a curriculum known as Multi-Ethnic Conversations by Dr. Mark DeMoss. Mark DeMoss has been a good friend and a great mentor during this process for me. We have subsequently written our own material because it is more pertinent to our setting and our specific given situations. But I want to encourage you that if you are beginning this process, no matter how infantile, that you begin some sort of cross-cultural setting where you're getting people together to honestly share from their heart concerning where they are and where they come from. Some of the great joys of being a part of a cross-cultural church is being able to form cross-cultural relationships. Some of our best friends are from literally all around the world. At the time of which I'm taping this, I have just been in the hospital last week. I've had people from Nigeria, from Korea, from India, from Ecuador, who have all contacted me and all blessed me as a part of my getting well. Literally, I feel like I'm a part of a global family. Some of the best parts of being a part of a cross-cultural family is knowing that the Revelation 7:9 way of looking at worship can be experienced in some small taste here upon this earth. And our worship service begins to reflect that. If you were to come to our church today, you would find that oftentimes we sing songs in different languages. Now, we can't sing a song in all the language groups that are gathered, but I have found that deference to any minority group shows that we are open to all minority groups. And so when we begin to sing something in Yoruba, one of the languages of Nigeria, or we begin to sing something in Spanish, or we begin to sing something in Mandarin, we begin to see people whose eyes perk up as they hear in their heart language something of which reminds them of homeland. And we begin to see how that begins to embrace all culture groups within our fellowship. And one of the great struggles is, of course, crossing language barriers. And many people will use that as an excuse for not trying to cross cultural barriers, that the language barrier is too great a gulf to cross. I have found that it can be crossed. And one of the ways that immediately came to mind was I thought about how that in the United Nations that they have ear sets that every single ambassador is hearing the speech in their own native tongue. I said, what if we were to do that within the church? And so a couple of years ago now, we took our sound booth that was up in the balcony of our congregation, and our music minister at the time wanted to move it to the floor level, and we moved it to the floor level, and so we had this booth sitting in the balcony of our congregation, unused. And I said, let's repurpose that. Let's divide it off into soundproof areas, and let's put people up in those booths who can, through live interpretation, interpret into native languages. We began with the largest language group in our area, Spanish speakers. And God sent us a missionary who had been serving in Mexico, who needed a place to stay, and so we put him up in our missionary residence, and he began our first language mission by interpreting to people who spoke Spanish. Since that time, God has sent us a retired school principal from Ecuador who was a principal in the Bronx, New York. He's taught Spanish on every level, the middle school, high school, collegiate level, and now he is our live interpretation speaker in Spanish. And as he's become retired and began to go and visit grandchildren literally around the world, God this past year sent us the daughter of a Spanish-speaking pastor from Mexico who is interning in our area, and she is now interpreting in Spanish. People oftentimes ask me, where do you get your interpreters from? We pray, and God seems to send just what we need. Our second language group was Korean. And as we began to form a partnership with the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, they moved their Korean Training Institute, all their Korean-speaking students, to our location. So on Mondays and Tuesdays of each week, over 100 Korean theological students meet at our facilities. Our very first intern from New Orleans Seminary was their student body president of the Korean Institute. His wife had been the interpreter for a little church called Thomas Road Baptist Church in Lynchburg, Virginia. I said, would you interpret into Korean for us in our services? She was honored. At the time that she began to interpret, we had 0 Korean speakers attending our church. She would interpret only to her husband in the congregation. We now have in excess of 50 attending Korean people in our congregation. Literally, if you interpret it, they will come. And then our third language group is Mandarin Chinese. This completes the 3 largest non-English speaking people groups in the Duluth area. Spanish first, Korean second, Mandarin Chinese third. To be honest with you, we prayed for a Mandarin Chinese interpreter for over 2 years. Oftentimes we would have someone of Chinese descent join our church, and I think I scared them half to death saying, I think you're the answer to our prayer. We're looking for an interpreter in Mandarin. And all of a sudden they began to think, oh my, I'm going to have to interpret the sermon every Sunday. And then after a 2-year time frame, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Jeremy Sin, yes, we have Sin in our church now. Dr. Jeremy Sin is a missionary with the North American Mission Board. He began attending our church, he and his wife, Josephine, and I thought that they were just checking us out, finding out what was going on at one of the local congregations. And after a couple of weeks, we did lunch together, and he said, my wife and I are considering becoming a part of the fellowship. I said, Jeremy, I've been looking for a Chinese interpreter, a Mandarin interpreter of our fellowship. And he said, I would be honored to be a part of that. Jeremy now interprets into Mandarin Chinese, and we literally have a half a dozen Buddhist housewives who attend our worship regularly, hearing the gospel in their native language. Language is not a barrier, it is a barrier that can be overcome. It's something that cannot be your excuse for refusing to try to meet the needs of an increasingly growing population group in your area. Ultimately, every community is going to deal with what we are currently dealing with: rapidly growing diversification. And unfortunately, I have found that a lot of predominantly Anglo churches are tending to want to bury their head in the sand and just merely say that that's not who we are. One of the things that I have found a lot of churches trying to go to or utilize with some degree of success, and I'm not trying to cast stones, but they're starting multiple language congregations within their own church facility. I know one church in our area that has 13 different language congregations meeting in their facilities. Now, my problem with that is that monocultural worship is monocultural worship even if it is across a cultural group. Monocultural Korean worship is the same as monocultural English worship. Monocultural Spanish worship is the same as monocultural Mandarin worship. And yet there is no crossing of those cultural barriers. Among first generation, there's a need for those language groups. One of the things we're finding is among second and third generations, they're looking for ways to be able to step out of those groups and to be able to be a part of a larger Christian community. Matter of fact, some cultural congregations in our area have really struggled with who we are as a church because they see what we're doing as a threat to their continued existence. We're not wanting to be that. Matter of fact, we've shared we'd rather partner with you than to try to be competition to you. But one of the things that I'm finding is that what we're doing is something that needs to be accomplished for there to be a future of the church in every community for a generation yet to come. I'd like to close with a story that has happened recently within our congregation. A lady by the name of Halima. Halima is an immigrant from Iran. Last summer, Halima appeared at our church one weekday morning. She had walked 2 miles to come to our church because someone had told her you can learn English at that church. We teach English classes at our church, but by the way, we also teach Spanish classes at our church, and we teach Korean classes at our church. When she came in the front door and was greeted by our volunteer receptionist, our volunteer receptionist informed her that our English classes are only during the school year, from August until May, and that they take the summers off. Disappointed that she had walked 2 miles to a place that no longer was teaching English classes, our front desk volunteer was a lady who had lived sometime in Saudi Arabia and spoke just a little bit of Farsi, her native language. She asked Halima, would you mind sitting here next to me and we can converse back and forth in English and you can practice your English on me and I'll give you a ride home so that you don't have to walk that 2-mile trek to get back to your house. And so Halima sat next to our front desk volunteer, Becky. I came in that day and noticed that there's Becky at our front desk, along with a lady with a scarf over her head who looked to be Muslim descent. And I said, there's got to be a story there. Somebody will tell me about it somewhere down the road. Becky took Halima back to her house, and Halima said, I'll come tomorrow and we can practice again. Becky shared with her, I only volunteer at the church at the front desk one day a week. I'll be there again next Tuesday. And she says, I'll come next Tuesday and we'll practice. The next Tuesday, I show up at church and there's Becky at her front desk duties. Halima, the little Muslim lady with her headdress, sitting right next to her, conversing in English together. That happened throughout the remainder of the summer. Halima asked Becky on one of their times, says, do you teach the Bible here at your church? She says, of course we teach the Bible here at the church. She said, no, do you teach the Bible at your church? She says, yes, I teach the 5th graders. I teach the children the Bible stories about Jesus. She said, could I come to your Bible class? And she goes, well, it's small children. She says, that's okay. I've never heard these stories. I'll sit in the back and I promise I will not disrupt. Becky said, of course you can come. And for the next few months, Halima became a regular in the 5th grade Sunday school class, sitting in the back with all of our 5th graders knowing that Halima was drinking in these new stories about our Savior, Jesus Christ. Finally, after a few months of attending Sunday school class in the 5th grade, Becky asked her, would you like to come to our worship service? I think that you would understand and get a lot out of what our pastor shares on Sunday mornings. So Halima began to come and sit next to Becky in our worship services almost every Sunday. Here was this lady in her Muslim headdress listening to the worship service every single Sunday morning. We became good friends with Halima. And Halima asked Becky and her husband Robert, my wife Glenda, and myself to be present at her swearing-in ceremony as a new citizen of the United States. And so we attended her swearing-in ceremony as she became a new U.S. citizen. We met her husband, Akeem. We met her children, and we told her that we were proud of who she was becoming. She continued to attend our church, and one Sunday morning after the worship service, I have a meet and greet time in our church cafe, and my wife Glenda and I are greeting the people, and she comes out and she says, I have something to tell you. Still in broken English, she typed into her cell phone what she wanted to say, and then she showed it to me. She said, I vow Jesus Christ. I believe in Jesus. Now, to be honest with you, Halima has not yet learned how to leave her Muslim faith to become totally a Christian. But she is most definitely a believer in Jesus Christ. Halima is the story that I want to tell over and over again, because there are so many Halimas out there. And a church that is not welcoming or desiring to cross cultural barriers will never reach Halima. There are not enough culturally sensitive churches to be able to meet that need. And so let me encourage you. Become a Technicolor church. Become a church that's filled with the wonderful, rich hues of your community. Find out who are the people groups that are out there for you to reach. Find out what it takes to cross those cultural barriers to meet those needs. And then do everything within your human power to find ways to be able to meet those needs. I encourage you to pick up a copy of my book, because within it you'll find some of the ways in which we progress down these lines. And I share with you not only what we did, but also some of the things we tried and didn't work. And I want to encourage you that you just continue to follow your Technicolor journey to become all that God wants you to be. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you. I look forward to hearing from you in the future. Please feel free to contact me. I'm available on Facebook, or I'm sure that we can share with you my email address, but we want to be able to stay in touch with people who are traveling down this journey, and may God bless you.